We want to thank you all for coming to our webinar today about motivating students. Of course, it's that time of the year, but it seems like especially this year, there's some real yearning for that summertime season. So thank you for taking the time to join us today so that we can talk about how we're working on motivating students. A couple of notes is we're more than welcome to answer any questions you might have, or if you have any ideas to share, throw them in the chat, throw them in the question and answer box, and we're happy to talk about them at the end of today's webinar. There's also a survey that will launch and an email that will include a recording of today's webinar that you'll get in about 24 hours. So if you do want to share this with anyone or go back and refer to any part of it, that will be available to you. Now, without any further ado, I want to introduce today's presenter, Dr. Pamela Booning, and she is Cloud9 World's Director of Curriculum and Professional Learning. And she is a really impressive person who has so many things, including, I learned right before this, I've worked with Pam for a while, she's still a licensed teacher and a licensed principal, but she also is a preeminent expert on online professional learning for educators, MTSS, and has incredible experience as an educator, administrator, strategist, consultant, author, online content curator, and international speaker. So without any further ado, I want to hand this over to Pam so she can talk about how she's going to motivate us.
All right. Well, that is the topic of this time of the year for sure. And that was one reason why we scheduled this webinar for this period of time in the year. Motivating students is never harder than it is in May. And of course, a lot of times what we hear is, but it's almost summer. So that's exactly what our students are probably thinking. But why do we have to do this? It's almost summer. It's May. Why would we need to do any other work? And of course, after this crazy year where students were in and out and hybrid and not, and online or live, it's been all over the map. So it's probably even more so this year, as Jenny mentioned. So I want to just review a few quick objectives that I hope to meet here during this webinar. And one is that we will explore some research behind engagement and motivation. And we also will explore some strength-based instruction and SEL and how that fits into the picture of things, as well as exploring the power of mystery and chance and how you can make that work for you in the classroom. And then talk briefly about the art of connection and how it also impacts that almost summer slide that we're referencing. And at the end, and I actually threw out, so I invite you to do this now, to go ahead and just, if you, as you're going through and you're listening, if you think of an idea or something that has worked well in your classroom here toward the end of the year that your students really are motivated with, please share that with your colleagues in the chat. We have lots of teachers on here today, and this is just a great way to have a takeaway for you that's very specific from one of your colleagues. So I encourage you to do that anytime throughout today. Just add that to the chat. And so all of you may want to keep a kind of a close eye on that chat for those ideas. And at the very end, again, you'll be able to harvest those ideas that are located in that chat area. So let's start with a little bit of research behind engagement and motivation. And this is, I have to be honest with you, a topic that has always fascinated me throughout my career as a teacher and as a principal, as a district administrator, is what really makes kids, specifically in this situation, tick. What is it that really engages them and motivates them to go over and above or a little bit beyond, or when it's summer to take that extra step and move a little bit forward? And I think a lot of it comes down to the whole idea of instruction and teaching and what the difference is between those two. And then taking a look at ourselves as educators and how we provide that instruction or teaching. So I put these two definitions up here for you. And I want you to just, to yourself here, think of a couple examples of instruction versus teaching. And then you may want to take a minute to just kind of decide, which do I really do? So as you can see here, instruction is really providing more of a step-by-step direction to someone else so they can complete a task. The information really flows one way. One person is active, the other one is passive. They're receiving the information and doing what the information says to do. So like when I follow a recipe to cook dinner or something, so try a new recipe, that's exactly what it is. It's a piece of instruction. It's one way to me, and I find it and then I follow it. Teaching, on the other hand, is a little bit different. It's more about that give and take, that guidance and feedback. While one person explores and experiences, it's more cooperative. One person's the expert, the other one's the learner. Both are active during the activity. So, number one, and really the bottom line of all of this motivation and engagement piece here, it comes down to, are we teaching or are we instructing? And if we're instructing, I can guarantee you the motivation and the engagement is not going to be what it would be. And why would it be? I mean, we have to think about it that way. We probably, all of us, respond much better to a teaching situation where there is a ebb and flow and both people are active throughout. So, for example, just the fact that I asked you to put in your ideas about what has worked well for your students is, I know we're virtual and we have this 1 hour together, so it's a little bit limited, but it is a way for you to contribute to this whole experience and to give and take from your colleagues. So that's one of the things I want you to take away from this is, of course, anything active would be a lot more engaging than something that's inactive. So you can see this guy sitting here and he doesn't look like he's very active in this whole situation. So I would also ask you to just to yourself, think of 5 words that describe something engaging to you, because it's likely that if it's engaging to you, it'll probably be engaging to your students. And if it's not engaging to you, they're going to see right through that and they'll notice that immediately. This was one of the reasons why I was continuously revamping what I was doing, trying new things with my students, does this work better than this? Does this excite them more than this? Because I was bored doing the same thing over and over again. I knew they would be. And so that's something for us to all think about and take away from that. Let's think about student perspectives now. Have you ever asked a student what makes them want to learn? Well, there has been research on that. And so I'm not gonna make you guess, but you can start thinking of your one answer. I gave one away already. Actually, the number one thing that makes students want to learn is experiencing success. And that's an important piece, noticing that, whatever we are doing in the classroom, that success has to be a part of that in order to make them want to engage more. Another one, and number 2, these are in order based on surveys that have been done, studies that have been done with students' perspectives on engagement. Curiosity is number 2. If they're curious about something, if it's something they're interested in. So those 2 things kind of go together. They want to know more. So that hook, and teachers, I know we've all heard this a million times, but the importance of that hook to get them really interested, whether it's something that you just bring in to show or a question that you ask or something like that will make them start thinking about connections. The third thing is originality, something, and you can replace this even with something that's new, something that's different, something that's fresh, something that you created, something that's totally new to them, that seems original for them. That's an important piece. And relationships. And, that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. The fact that relationships make a difference, especially when we come to May and June, at the end of the school year, when our students say, but it's almost summer, they are more likely to actually be motivated and engaged with you if you already have a positive relationship with them. If we haven't taken the time all year to build those relationships, when we get to summer, it's a lot harder to get them to do what it is you need them to do. Let's also look at some classroom conditions that are important for student engagement. Number 1, and this goes without saying, physical and emotional safety, positive culture. We all know about these things. This is just a quick review for you. established routines. So even though you've done this at the beginning of the school year, perhaps, it's time to revisit those a lot of times at the end of the class or of the school year as well, just as reminders, but kind of to reestablish some of those things. That will keep some of that motivation engagement fresh and positive, because students respond well to those kinds of things. If, we're all tired at the end of the school year as well. So if we let things go at the end of the school year, well, we're almost finished, it's almost summer, then we are actually reflecting that same attitude that we don't want them to have. And they see through that right away. And so they'll pick up on that and they'll start letting things go. And so that's part of what we want to make sure that we are doing. So all of those, again, are really related to building relationships and then those conditions that we are promoting in the classroom. So another thing to think about is a lot of times we don't really consider that engagement, motivation, all of that comes from the heart and the mind. So there's some things that we need to do to touch something deeper sometimes than just turn to page 4, turn to page 20 or whatever. We need to go a lot deeper than some of those things to see if we can engage those areas of ourselves and our students. Now, whenever I talk about this topic, this is one of the biggest questions or set of questions that come up from educators. And I understand why, because I've had probably a lot of the same training that all of you have throughout the last 30 years. Intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. And there is a thought out there that it's completely wrong to have students involved with extrinsic motivation, and that really is setting them up for always expecting rewards. And I understand that thought, and I agree on some levels. But I also have noticed this in my career, that we have students on this whole continuum of extrinsic to intrinsic. There's some students that right at the beginning of the school year, you'll notice they're intrinsically motivated. They are school kind of kids. They do well academically, and they're motivated intrinsically because they have experienced success already. And because of some of those other factors we already talked about, they may have the ability to look at everything you do as something new or original, and it excites them because they love to learn. So those students are automatically intrinsically motivated. But we have students on the other end of that too, who may not have experienced success, who have struggled with school, whose parents have struggled with school, and they're not intrinsically motivated. They are not there yet. In order for them to experience that success and to move further to that intrinsic end of the spectrum, they may need some extrinsic motivation to get them there. And so I believe in both, and I believe that there is a place where both can coexist together in any classroom. Of course, it's important to understand that intrinsic motivation and move your students toward that end. That's the goal, because we want them to be intrinsic learners, obviously. And there's some things that are intrinsic, as you'll see as we go on with this research, and you can tap into those. But I wouldn't totally get rid of some of that extrinsic motivation, because you may have some kiddos that depend on that for little steps of success, for that feeling of success as they go through. And eventually they may get to the point where they don't need it, but some of them need it at the beginning. So is there a place for tangible rewards? Yes, there is. I wouldn't make it all that, but there definitely is a place for that, especially for some students. How important is personal recognition? Huge. And I'm not talking about tangible rewards here. I'm talking about personal recognition. When I recognize Jenny for doing an outstanding job on her webinar today, that's personal recognition. That means something. That's a motivator for any one of us. We feel motivated when we have any kind of personal recognition as well. So that's an important piece. It doesn't need to be in front of everybody, but it does need to be something that student understands from you, that you've noticed and you've recognized. Really an important piece. So that can build a lot of points, so to speak, for you in the intrinsic area. Can both of these motivators be utilized? Yes, absolutely. So I think the best combination is to do actually a combination of both. That's probably the best thing. I did some research on motivation in the past 10 years because this was such a big area of interest of mine. And this is what I have found. And it was interesting because it was especially with secondary students, which tend to be the hardest ones to motivate. But the top 3 motivators in this order were these things. Goal setting. Now, we do a lot of goal setting. I know we do. We work it into a lot of what we do, but we don't always revisit those goals often enough. So it's something to consider. If your students are already doing quarterly goals or semester goals, that's wonderful. But some students need goals for small steps to feel, again, that progress, because remember, this is a motivator. So maybe in this sense, goal setting is for short-term goals so that they can see their own success. That's part of this whole feeding into motivation. The second top motivator was monitoring their own progress toward goals. And one of the things I've noticed in education is we are great at setting goals, we're great at writing action plans, but we don't often revisit them or maybe check our progress toward those goals. So that's a big piece of motivating. We're missing that piece when we don't take the time to allow our students to monitor their own progress. The star chart is kind of like a famous or infamous kind of example from way back when. This is actually probably from 30 years ago when I was in school or more. When we are putting the stars on the star chart, or something that you might even do at home with your own students or your own children. But it doesn't matter what it looks like. It's something that they can see. It's visual. It's monitoring progress toward their personal or individual goals, learning goals, behavior goals. Doesn't matter what those goals are, but these motivators are in place. The third thing would be choice. And, choice is huge. We all love choice. We thrive on choice. And one of the things that even we do at Cloud9 World is we build in choice to all of our curriculum for students and for teachers, because we understand that that is such a big motivator. And if we don't have choice of learning activities, it's teachers don't buy in as easily. And that's just a fact of who we are as people. And it matters to us a lot. And it could be small choices. It could be whether or not I use a red pen or a blue pen. It could be whether or not I use a pen or a pencil. But any kind of choices that we can provide for students help them own their learning, and that becomes a big motivator. It could be the order of activities that you have for them during that day. Just allowing them to choose the order can make a difference. Let's take a look at strength-based instruction now. And, I think a lot of times we miss part of this, but, a lot of times when we talk about motivation, we think about, well, we're all saying to ourselves, right? It's all about me. What is in it for me? And so that's exactly what strength-based instruction kind of does, is it gets a student to feel like and understand that, hey, it's all about you. Learning about yourself is a good thing. And self-awareness is one of those domains of CASTLE that we talk about for social emotional learning. It's a huge part of, it's a motivator to learn more about yourself, about what you're good at, what you're strong at, and then utilizing those strengths to make you stronger in other areas. And that's really what this approach does. I love this quote by John Joseph Powell. I'm going to read it out loud. And I want you to just think about this, because I believe this is so true for us as adults as well as for our students. It is an absolute human certainty that no one can know his own beauty or perceive a sense of his own worth until it's been reflected back to him or her in the mirror of another loving, caring human being. And really, as teachers, this is what we do. So a strength-based approach actually builds relationships, because again, you're mirroring back to your students who they are, what their worth is, and based on just them being them, as well as some things they're good at, as we all are good at something. So again, I wanted to bring this before you because it does have something to do with social emotional learning. It does have something to do with some of those competencies. So that self-awareness, and we tend to start with that in that the first area there of SEL. If we were going to put them in order, I would probably start with that, even at the pre-K age, understanding the self. But this never ends. This goes through adulthood as well. And we can't manage ourselves if we don't understand ourselves. That's one of those things I was always thinking about, as well as, how can we really be aware of others if we don't understand ourselves? And understanding ourselves has a lot to do with building positive relationships with other people, with communicating with other people, working with other people. And of course, making responsible decisions, I believe, is a part of also understanding ourselves and knowing what we can and can't do, what we can and can't commit to, for example. So all of those things do come into play. A strength-based teaching also has a few characteristics that are important when we come to this time of the year. And I always think about that, even though this could be any time of the year for any of our students, especially after this year that we've all experienced. Strength-based teaching works well with students who have experienced trauma and stress. It does that because it's focused on those strengths. And if you've experienced trauma and stress this year, and most of your students probably have as well, you probably know that very thing very well yourself. You know that if you are focused on what you're strong in, that's part of what can keep you going. It's also part of how you can build resilience as you move forward. So that's part of what supports also social emotional skill development and models seeing value in others. So, if we're going to develop empathy in our students, that's part of it, is seeing value in other people. So it does start with your perspective, though. And, as we reflect on our teaching, how we see our students is a very important part of that. And we're going to get to that again in a minute. Basic components of a strength-based approach to building relationships, which is what we're trying to do as part of that motivating factor there, is identifying students' existing strengths, honoring and valuing, acknowledging those strengths, helping our students build awareness of their own strengths, helping them know who they are, and building instructional programming that really boosts those social ties and networks by drawing on those strengths. So as we know their strengths, Johnny is a great artist. Let's let him focus on this part of their project, and that immediately gives Johnny intrinsic value, knowing that his skills are needed in that area. One of the things that we typically overlook when we're talking about motivation and engagement is the power of mystery and chance. I'm not sure why, but we seem to forget. I will tell you this, though. The gamers, they found it, right? So anybody who gamifies their instruction has learned about the power of mystery and chance, as well as a bunch of other things that we will mention here today. But let's take a look at that mystery and chance item. And, it doesn't matter what the age is. I mean, of course, there's ways to make it more appropriate for different ages, but the whole element of this is part of who we are as human beings. So part of it is the thrill of the unknown. And the thrill of the unknown entices and engages students of all ages. Think about sometimes I take a look at what's on TV and what some of the most watched programs would be, and there are a lot of them that are based on the unknown, things that are on the unknown, some kind of mystery or some kind of thing that's been solved, or some of those kinds of ideas. People, just human beings, are enticed by that. That's important to them. So how can we work that into our instruction? That's what we're trying to think about today. Well, one way is to really capitalize on curiosity. So, for example, humans are born curious. We are naturally curious. We like to discover things. So rather than tell, allow your students to discover. That's one way you can capitalize on that curiosity. So as we're thinking about the end of the school year now, you know your students very well by now, and they know you. But this is a great time, if you haven't done as much of this as you wanted to this year, especially considering the situation we've all been working in. Um, this might be a great time to really capitalize on discovery and flip your lessons a little bit so that students are on the discovery end rather than you telling them the facts or the things that you want them to learn. Allow them, think about a way that you can utilize them making those discoveries. And you can, of course, give them clues. I mean, there's lots of teachers I've seen do treasure hunts and, all kinds of mystery types of things related to this to see if they could figure things out first, draw the conclusions, and then again, they're doing their learning that way. But this is a great time of the year to experiment with some of those things if you haven't already. The other way is through lots of other kinds of activities. So, for example, just adding any kind of excitement or new curiosity with opportunities for mystery and chance. Now, I used to do this every day in my classroom in some way or another. I would try to work it in some way. So I taught a lot of middle school in my career. And, middle schoolers are a lot of fun. They are a little older than those elementary students who also would love this type of thing. But I know that even high school students will subscribe to this in some ways. You just need to be creative and figure out the way that will work best for your students. So whether it was a paper bag that I would bring and put names in there and draw those out during the day for a variety of opportunities, it could be starting something on the board or choosing their own group or choosing their own seat for that day, something, that doesn't bother you, of course, because it's something that you want to provide for them, maybe a special choice, special opportunity, special whatever. And it becomes fun for the students because they don't really know who's going to be picked. And, it ends up being, and you'll know when you ask your own students when they come home at the end of the day, what did you do today at school? A lot of times my son would point out the things that had to do with these things. It wasn't, and he was learning by doing these things, but it was the idea that it was fun because they didn't know. It was sort of, it was like playing Jeopardy, or it was a game, or it was something that was normally routine, but the teacher pulled something out of a bag or had them unwrap something in order to find out something or whatever. That one little thing is what stuck with the student and really made them, of course, then understand or remember the learning as well. So you can make things memorable by utilizing mystery and chance. So things like established routines, and I named a couple of ideas there, or activity options. Lots of different activities. You put them in a bag. You can write them on sticks or whatever. Put them in a bag. Have students draw them out. That's the one you get's the one you get. Or you can even add in there, you're allowed one trade. You can agree to one trade with one person in this room, and you have 10 seconds to do it. So again, it gives them that option. I had a choice and I had Jeopardy kind of thing. I didn't know there was mystery and chance involved. And I also then had a choice to trade up or trade off with somebody else. Assessment options, it works well with those also. So it could be questions, it could be certain activities that they do as part of that assessment. Grouping, establishing groups, playing games, problem solving challenges. Those are just some things. There are a million and one things you can do. The other thing you can do, and I put the little dartboard here, but you could use, and then you notice it's a foam dartboard. I just want to point that out. You wouldn't want to have a real dartboard in your classroom probably, but maybe a foam one, or, shooting a paper ball into the waste paper can, as either reward or as an opportunity to answer a question or whatever. Anytime you add in a game or add in something like that, you're adding that element of mystery, chance. I don't know if I'll make it. This makes it more fun. And again, at this time of the year, this is one of the best ways to go. So part of this whole mystery and chance idea is that you kind of reflect on your own instruction at this time of the year, what it is you have to cover. Think about the activities, the lessons, and the units you already have that you need to fulfill yet before the end of the year. and think of some ways you can gamify them in some way. And again, you've noticed that I have not mentioned anything about digital games. Digital games are great, and there's definitely a place for that, but you don't have to play just digital games. There are lots of other kinds of games. So you can work in board games, you can work in games you make up. You can have students make up games. That's a great way to do it. They have to do a lot of problem solving to do that, as a matter of fact. It's a great thinking exercise. But there's all kinds of ways that you can utilize that to make things fresh and new. Remember, those are those things that really bring some of that motivation out. So puzzles and riddles and discovery, any kind of adventure, or sometimes retitling something is all that it takes. And then kind of amping it up maybe with a few points or levels they can earn, or, you know, anything new. Sometimes it's just tweaking what you're already doing. Could be a routine that you've had all year and they've mastered that routine, but you put a little twist in it. So, you know, maybe they have to do a push up as part of that routine. I know that sounds silly to you, but you know what? To your students, it's fresh and new and exciting. And so this is, again, a way that you can revitalize things here at the end of the year. So I love this visual here because I thought, well, that's kind of cool. You could really work that in with a lot of different things, but it's neat. What a neat thing it would be if kids could draw their own mazes, and then they could decide, you know, some of the parameters. You could have invisible walls that they could walk through. There's all kinds of things you could do to that. So lots of ideas there. One of the final areas I want to really touch on is the art of connection. And we talked a little bit about that, about our building relationships with students. That's something that we do all year long. And a lot of times at this end of the year time is when the benefits of those relationships actually come to fruition for you, because while a lot of students don't want to do something, they will work for you because of how you are. And they do work for you because of how you are and not who you are. So I know when I first started teaching, I thought to myself, yeah, they'll work for me because I'm the teacher. They're the student, I'm the teacher. Naturally, they're going to work for me. No, that's not how it is. They will work for you because of how you are, not who you are. So once they get to know how you are, that you are patient, that you are able to day in, day out be consistent, that you are focused on that positive relationship and on, you know, teaching and instructing, that you care about their progress, you care about them every day, and you notice them every day, then they begin to say, I like her, I'm going to work for her. So even at the end of the year, when they don't feel like it because it's summer, and they would say, "Oh, miss, but it's almost summer." You can say, "Yep, but I know you work for us anyway," and they will. So that relationship cannot be underestimated. You know, part of building a relationship is viewing every interaction you have with your children as a mental health touch point. And that can't be more important than it is right now. As our students have come back to school and they've experienced a lot of different things, not being right there with you day in, day out, it's been a really crazy year for everyone. So just remember that as you go through. I know it's the end of the year for us too. So as we walk into the classroom, sometimes it's hard to give that little bit more because you've been giving all year and you guys have been working so hard this year. But, you know, any kind of self-reflection or personal affirmation or sharing, you know, with each other, creative greetings that you can do, creating some small groups, implementing icebreakers, any of those things to help, you know, just bring that to the forefront so that they're able to express their emotions. They feel safe in that regard. Um, you can use it as talking points. You can use sticky notes as encouragements, any of those little things. Here at the end of the year, this is also very important as well. We want them to leave school with that idea that this has been a great year. I learned a lot and somebody valued me. So I'll be ready to go back when it's time, whether it's summer school or whether it's the beginning of the next school year. So building of relationships has a lot to do with how we see our students. And it's interesting, you know, I've met a million teachers along my long career, and I moved around a lot as well. And I have noticed, and even in myself, you know, do I see students as this valuable, beautiful vase, or am I looking more at the cracks? Now, we all are vases with cracks in it, that's for sure. But how do I view them? Do I see them like this, or do I see them like this? Do I see my role as enhancing the beauty that's already there? Or do I see my role as fixing what's broken? Which we do, but we're not just fixers, we're enhancers. And that is part of that teaching, is that facilitation, that enhancing, and helping them see that beauty in themselves. So I would challenge you to take a look at yourself, even now here at the end of the year. I know we're human, and there's some students that you'll probably be very happy to pass along for the next teacher. But, you know, we want to see them for who they are, some of the most beautiful things, and make sure to reinforce that here at the end of the year so that they see that in themselves. You know, one way we can do this is through something that's called I See You. And this is something that I learned from a mentor, and I wish I could remember her name, and I cannot, because she was, I met her one time, but she used to, in her younger days, do a lot of professional development. And, you know, one of the things she would always say is, we need to notice. We need to notice people for who they are, not what they do, not what they look like, you know, not just when they do something well, but just notice them, just see them for who they are. And this is one of the most valuable things. And it's actually hard to do when you first start, but it's really just noticing them without judgment. So just thinking through, and you can take a couple of your students in your mind right now and see if you can create some ICU statements, is what I call it, for use with your students. So it might be something like Tommy walking in the classroom, and you say something like, Tommy, I see that you have a new backpack. Not that your backpack looks cool or anything like that. I just noticed that you have a new backpack. And Tommy's thinking to himself, oh, she noticed I didn't have one yesterday. Now she notices something different on me today. Or Susie, I noticed you have a haircut today. Not I like it, because again, that's the judgment part of it. And then, you know, then they're always trying to please because of that judgment end. But noticing them for who they are. And like I said, it's difficult to do because we tend to be the other way, where we're trying to always reinforce positive behavior, positive this, positive that, acting this way, being this way, and doing this thing. But this is really just noticing them for them. And if you can do that with every student every day, that's a very powerful message that you're sending to that student. I value you for who you are. I see you for who you are. And again, as I said before, we're making those connections. This is part of what will help you through the end of the year kind of time in your motivating students. Of course, greeting students individually by their names is an important part. Now, I know lots of people do that, which is fantastic. And I think more people do that than ever before. But even, and you see the handshake here, of course, with COVID, we can get creative with other ways that we can bump, or, you know, whatever we need to do, make a little action or whatever it is. But there are lots of different ways that you can individually greet your students, and if by nothing else, just by their names. Of course, by now we know their names at this time of the year, so it may mean something more, and you can maybe add something, a twist to it, to make it even more interesting. Again, it's motivating your students just to come into your classroom in the morning is sometimes a huge part, especially at this end of the year. So here are some unique greetings. I mean, this is nothing new. I'm sure you have seen many of these, but if you haven't tried it, now that you know your students well, this time of the year, you know their names, see if you could add in one or two or three of these items and see, is this something that could work for you? Again, I always look at this time of the year as a great time of experimentation. You only have about a month left or less. And some of the things that you may have been hesitant to try, especially early on this year with all of the changes and in and outs, you can try now in anticipation for next year. And then, you have the summer to think about it and think about how you can enhance it for starting the year. But it might be a cool idea. Get your um, students to work with you so you can try a few new things. Part of building connection is also building trust. So, we know that that is consistency over time. And I love that saying because that is very much true. So you've been consistent all year. And so this last little month, I encourage you to be consistent for one more month as you're with your students. Take them to the end here. One of the ways that you can build trust is by making little deposits. And so this is, again, nothing new. This is a lot of people do this already, but every time you do any of these things, you give them your time or show appreciation or keep your promise even, or show genuine interest, all of those times, or even when you're vulnerable yourself in front of your students, you're making a deposit into their trust jar, into your relationship jar with them. And they feel that it's maybe not a physical thing, but it's really happening. And so they notice, wow, she was vulnerable. She told us how she felt today. That must have been hard to do. Ding, as a little deposit in your trust jar with that student or those students. And when we get to the end of the year, then we sometimes need them to have those deposits in there so that they can overcome that almost summer idea and maybe fall back. If they have that, that's part of them working for how you are, not who you are. At the same time, and we have to be careful of this, we can take withdrawals without even meaning to. We don't often mean to at all. It's just sometimes it just happens. But these are things that would take withdrawals from trust. So anytime we break confidentiality, or we take someone for granted, or we have an unreasonable expectation just because we feel like it, or we take and not really share, or we dominate and we don't allow them to have input. There are a lot of things. I know you can add this to this as far as a teacher-student relationship, but that consistency is really an important thing. So thinking about, are you making deposits based on withdrawals? When we ask them to do something, sometimes that can be looked at as a withdrawal, but if you've made enough deposits, then the withdrawal isn't as difficult for the student. So the rule is 4 deposits to every 1 withdrawal. So, and we did talk about this already. One way is, of course, connecting your kids with each other. So it's one thing for you to connect with them, but you want them to have connections with each other. Our students haven't had enough of that this year with all of the craziness. So anything you can do to connect, reconnect and connect, because perhaps your students have not been together physically for very often this year. Even though it's the end, you want to help them get some relationships with each other established before summer happens. So that's one of the reasons why connecting your kids is so important. Think about how you pair your students. And this is another way you can bring a lot of fun, a lot of new kind of things into your classroom. You can see here these little cards: salt and pepper, macaroni and cheese, hamburger and fries. These things tend to go together. So these would be, I'm sure you can find this on Pinterest somewhere. Little cards that you could print out, cut out, and have students choose a card, and then they find their match. That's just a fun way to do it in elementary school. It can be states and capitals. It could be, whatever it is you're learning. So you could probably have some things that go together with vocabulary that you're teaching, or things like that, or even descriptive words describing characters that you've been reading about. In primary, it could be shapes and colors. So there's a million different ways you can do this, but connect kids with kids. And if they've been with only one person or a few people, they're not building the connections they need to go forward through the summer, to have friends. If some students are going to be in summer school, give them some opportunities to work together before they go so they know each other already. So this connection piece is super important, especially this year. And you can wrap a lot of fun and motivation into those ideas. The other reason why it's important to connect your kids with each other as well as with you is that even though it is the end of the year, you're still creating a community, or you're reinforcing the community that you've already created, because you want them to leave school with that feeling of, I belong to this community right here. Mrs. Jones' class is who I belong to this year. Next year, I look to belong to another group. And it's part of how they are going to establish moving from sort of that safe and withdrawn zone, especially if they were virtual this year, out through that fear zone into a more growth zone. And that's really where we want them to be, is moving forward in that way. So, that's been one of the challenges coming back after being virtual or not having school, has been bringing students and even adults, and those of us who've worked at home feel the same way. We're kind of in our comfort zone. We're at home and we're safe and we're in control. And now going back out again, it's kind of, we're in the fear zone a little bit, maybe in the learning zone. I haven't had to be around as many people this year. And so, it is different. It's different for our children as well. So, even though it's this last month of school, I think we need to really think about how we can move them out of their comfort zones so they feel like they're getting more back to normal. And that's, again, part of that engagement experience, part of that motivation to look forward to school for the next year. So with that, I wanted to summarize what an almost summer idea is. So in summary, we can say it's definitely something new, maybe something interactive, something creative, something fun and exciting, and maybe extensions of what you were doing already. So those are just some ideas to kind of help you capture that. So I would like for you now to, if you haven't already, go ahead and add some of your almost summer ideas that have worked well for your students just in the chat, so your colleagues can pick up on that and utilize some of those ideas. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jenny for any questions.
So we have one question, but also we have one person who raised their hand. So okay. I'm going to allow TB to talk. So if you wanted to talk, it looks like on your end you're muted, but we'd love to hear from you. And perhaps they're stepped away for a second. So I will also ask the question that came into the Q&A, and like Pam said, any questions or comments that you have, throw them in the chat and share. But we do have one question that came in that said, you talked a lot about the importance of the connection to have students with teachers throughout the year. Do you have any recommendations on what to do if you're a new long-term sub in a classroom?
Wow. And that's really a tough position to be in, but I would just build as many close connections as you can with your students that you have there right now. And I kind of look at it like this: every time, every day we sew into our students, it's going to be something for them. Of course, you're temporary, so it may not be an advantage to you next year as you start the classroom or the year. But it's funny, just like adults, kids talk, right? So they may move on to the next grade, but they'll be telling some of the ones who have you, oh, she's cool, she's pretty good. I had a good time in there. In the end of the year, we did this and this and this. They talk just like we do. So I would suggest go ahead and, building as many relationships as you can with them before they leave you.
And we did just have one other question that came in as well that just asked if you had any favorite games when you were in the classroom to help build those connections.
I mentioned some things already. I think, part of the thing I tried to do was just always be in the present with them. So, I used to say I would get into the zone. When I walked in that room or in the building, I would kind of put on my game face, be in the zone so that I would forget all my personal life or whatever else was going on, because, you know, there's always stuff going on in our personal lives, so that I could really focus on them. And when I could do that, that was when I could build the best connections. It's when we had the most fun. It's when I was probably the most creative and thinking about, you know, ways to interact with them. Um, I would say in middle school, I think one of my favorite things was really adding the chance and the that engagement in there. I know one time, and I was an elementary teacher first, so you know, I know, I believe some of the best middle school teachers have been elementary as well, because there is still some kid in those young people. And I was teaching reading, and we were trying to do, you know, a thing to motivate them to read more at home, of course. And so I said, all right, let's just do a reading race. I know 7th grade, it's a little bit corny to put race cars on the back of the, you know, and a big bulletin board on the back of the room and, you know, track their growth. But again, they were setting goals. And so that was part of it. It was before I even read that research, but we were, you know, they were checking their progress, and they could move the race car based on the sheets they brought back that were signed by parents and so on. And you know what? I really didn't think that my toughest class would get into it. I thought, yeah, they're just not gonna. And they were the most into it out of everyone. And so people, students who typically hated reading, liked that one thing. And so it was the thing I thought, nah, they'll never like this, not in a million years. So I have been super surprised what happens when you, I don't have one with me, but when you have an envelope and you pull something out, and that very thing of them not being able to see, and then you pull something out and it's the surprise, or you pulled somebody's name, or they pulled out an activity that, um, they love it. They just love that chance and not knowing. They just love it.
Wonderful. Well, we haven't had any other questions come in. So you can always reach out to us if you have questions later. As I mentioned, you will get a recording of today's video in your mailbox in about 24 hours. But we look forward to seeing you at other future webinars. And oh, I do have one. Oh, I have one more question that came in. Do you have any suggestion of digital games?
Oh, let's see. Well, let's see, there are lots of them now. I would just do a search, because there are so many new apps that allow you to utilize your content, put those in there, and then utilize those apps. So some of them are for individual students, some are whole class experiences, but I would definitely utilize that. There are courses out there too about gamifying your learning. And so that's a huge way to take advantage of it.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you so much, Pam, for sharing all of your expertise. And we hope to see everyone again at another one of our webinars. Have a great day.
Thank you.